Sometimes the smallest words echo the loudest. A simple thank you can find its way through walls, across cities, and into the life of someone who thought they'd stop being seen. She thought she was just thanking a stranger, a kind man who handed her coffee on a morning when everything felt too heavy. But what she didn't know was that he wasn't just a stranger. He was the man at the top, the one whose name she typed every morning without realizing he'd soon change her life forever. If you believe in quiet kindness, in the moments that go unseen but never unfelt, then stay till the end. Because this story isn't just about gratitude. It's about how one small act of noticing someone can rebuild a heart that's forgotten what it means to matter. Like, share, and subscribe to Between Raindrop Stories, where every story begins with a storm and ends with light. The morning light crawled across the glass towers of the city, turning their edges gold while the rest of the world rushed beneath them. Cars, rain, footsteps, the smells of coffee, and deadlines, all blending into one endless hum of modern life. Inside one of those towers, at the 47th floor, Everline Financial woke up to another day of business. And at the front desk, where marble met metal and money met silence, sat Clara Benson. Every morning, before anyone else arrived, she wiped the counter spotless. She adjusted the little vase of fake lilies the way she always did, straight, centered, as if something so small could make the place feel alive. And she smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but had been practiced enough to look real. She had been the receptionist here for almost 2 years. 2 years of good morning, welcome to Everline, 2 years of can I help you find an appointment? 2 years of standing on tired feet and borrowed heels that pinched at the sides. No one really saw her. Not the executives who brushed past her on the way to meetings, not the clients who looked at her name tag without remembering it. She was a part of the furniture, polite, efficient, invisible. But today was heavier than most. Her bus had broken down on the way to work. She'd spilled coffee on her only white blouse and had to dry it under the bathroom hand dryer. And her landlord's text still blinked on her phone, a final warning about rent that was already a week late. Still, she showed up early, as always. Still, she smiled, because that's what you do when you're holding your world together with quiet hope. It was a little after 9 when the stranger arrived. He wasn't like the usual crowd that flooded through the lobby. No Bluetooth headset, no frantic phone calls, just a tall man in a charcoal gray coat, carrying a black leather folder and the kind of calm that made people look twice. He paused by the desk, his voice low and unhurried. "Morning." Clara looked up, startled by the gentleness of his tone. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" He hesitated, glancing at the elevator bank, then back at her. "Actually, I'm early for a meeting. Mind if I wait here a minute?" "Of course," she said quickly, motioning to the guest chairs. Her eyes flicked to his coat. Understated but expensive, the kind of quality that whispered, old money, not new. As he sat, he gave her a small smile. "You must be here every day." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "I pass by sometimes. You're always here before everyone else." Her cheeks warmed. "Oh, well, someone has to make sure the lilies aren't crooked." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that carried warmth, not mockery. "That's a rare kind of pride, miss." "Benson," she supplied. "Clara Benson." "Clara," he repeated, like tasting the name. "That's a nice name." She smiled, caught off guard by his sincerity. Most people didn't even look at her long enough to read her name tag. "Thank you," she murmured. "Would you like me to let your meeting know you've arrived?" He shook his head. "No rush. I like watching how mornings begin." Then, almost to himself, he added, "Everyone is in such a hurry to look important. No one looks around anymore." Something about the way he said it made her glance at him differently. He didn't sound like a client. He sounded like someone observing from a higher floor or a different world. They didn't speak again after that. But when the elevator finally opened and he stood to leave, he turned back to her and said, "You're doing great. You know that, right?" Clara blinked, caught between confusion and emotion. "I'm sorry." "Whatever your morning was, you're still smiling. That's rare. Keep doing that." And with that, he stepped inside the elevator and disappeared. That afternoon, between call transfers and client check-ins, she noticed a cup sitting on her desk. A perfectly made cappuccino, with her name written neatly on the lid. A note was tucked under the sleeve. You make people feel seen, even when no one's looking at you. From a stranger who noticed you. Her breath caught. She looked around the lobby, but no one seemed to be watching. She smiled. Really smiled this time, the kind that reached her eyes and stayed there for the rest of the day. That night, as she closed her tiny apartment door and set down her bag, she took out a small card and began to write. To the kind stranger who left me coffee today. You don't know what your words meant. I've been having a hard time lately, but somehow that note reminded me that kindness still exists. So, thank you. Truly. Clara. She folded the note neatly, slid it into a small envelope, and decided she'd leave it with security in the morning for the man in the gray coat. And when she went to sleep that night, her apartment still felt small, the bills were still unpaid, and the city still roared outside her window. But for the first time in a long time, Clara Benson felt seen. And she had no idea that the man she thanked with her whole heart was the one who signed her checkbook.
By the time morning light poured through the tall glass of Everline Financial, Clara's thank you note was already traveling farther than she ever imagined. It started small, a sealed white envelope left with security, addressed simply to the man in the gray coat. The guard wasn't sure where to send it. He shrugged, set it in the internal mail bin, and forgot about it by noon. But the thing about kind words, they have a way of finding the right hands, even when no one knows where they're supposed to go. By Thursday morning, that envelope was sitting on the edge of a polished oak desk belonging to Ethan Rowe, the CEO of Everline Financial. He almost didn't notice it. His morning had already been swallowed by meetings, budget reviews, investor calls, and a board discussion that left a faint pulse of anger in his jaw. It wasn't until he returned to his office hours later that his assistant, Kelly, said, "Oh, and this came for you. It's handwritten." Ethan frowned, lifting the envelope. No company letterhead, no cinder, just simple black ink. He turned it over. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind of handwriting people used when they still cared how things looked on paper. He opened it. To the kind stranger who left me coffee today, you don't know what your words meant. I've been having a hard time lately, but somehow that note reminded me that kindness still exists. So, thank you. Truly. Clara. He read it once, then again, and by the third time he wasn't reading the words anymore, he was feeling them. Something in that letter pierced through the armor he'd built around his days. The meetings, the money, the metrics, all of it suddenly felt quieter. He folded the note gently, as though it were something fragile. Clara, he murmured under his breath. He didn't recognize the name, but the sincerity in her words felt foreign in this building, like sunlight breaking through fluorescent light. That evening, while the city drowned in the sound of traffic and rain, Ethan stood by his window and looked down at the lights below. He couldn't remember the last time someone had thanked him, not for a deal, not for a contract, but for something simple. His days had become transactional. His success had come at the cost of silence. He thought of the girl who wrote the letter, imagined her as one of the hundreds of employees who greeted strangers all day and went home unseen. And the truth struck him harder than he expected. He used to be kind once, before the mergers, the money, and the boardrooms. Now, he barely remembered their names. Down on the first floor, Clara had almost forgotten about the letter. She didn't expect a reply. She didn't need one. The act of writing it had been enough, a way to release something from her chest she hadn't said aloud in years. Thank you for seeing me. But that week had been brutal. Her rent was overdue again. Her mother's medical bills were piling up back home, and now her manager, Mr. Connors, had just informed her that the company might be streamlining front desk positions. Streamlining, corporate language for cutting. Clara tried to keep her voice steady. Does that mean I'm being let go? Not yet, Connors said flatly. But the CEO's reviewing efficiency numbers. If we can automate client check-ins, we may not need a full-time receptionist. Her heart dropped. Right, of course. Efficiency. That night she stayed long after everyone left. The lobby was empty except for the faint hum of the elevator and the rain against the glass. She took a deep breath, pulled out her small notebook, and wrote another note, this time not for anyone in particular. Dear, whoever needs to hear this, you matter. Even if your name isn't on the door, even if no one remembers to say thank you, the world still needs people like you. She tucked it beneath her keyboard, half smiling at her own foolishness. But that note would matter more than she could ever imagine. The next morning, Ethan arrived early. He'd spent half the night thinking about Clara's words, about how something so simple could feel so rare. He'd pulled her employee record. Receptionist, age 28, 2 years of service, salary barely above minimum wage. He sat there, staring at the screen, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Guilt. He buzzed his assistant. Kelly, when's the last time I've met anyone from the front desk? Kelly hesitated. You haven't, sir. Then I'd like to. Should I schedule a meeting? He shook his head. No, let's keep it unannounced. By mid-morning, Clara was already on her third client greeting when the elevator doors opened again and he stepped out. The man in the gray coat. Only this time she noticed the subtle details. The security badge clipped to his belt, the quiet authority in his posture, the way even the senior managers straightened as he passed. Her stomach fluttered. This wasn't just any stranger. Who was he? He stopped at her desk, same calm expression, same warmth in his eyes. Morning, Miss Benson. She blinked. You remember my name? He smiled faintly. Of course. He placed a cup on the counter, cappuccino again, and said, You left me something. Her heart skipped. Oh, the note. I didn't know if it would even reach you. It did, he said softly, and it made me realize something I'd forgotten. She tilted her head. What's that? He hesitated, then said quietly, That kindness can still change things, even here. Before she could reply, one of the managers called his name. Mr. Rowe, your meeting's ready. And the world seemed to tilt for a moment. Mr. Rowe. The name on the letterhead of every paycheck, every company memo. She stared after him, speechless, heart pounding in her chest. The kind stranger who brought her coffee was the CEO of the entire company. She sank back into her chair, hands trembling slightly. The marble floor reflected her stunned face. Everything she'd written in that letter, the honesty, the exhaustion, the small confessions, they'd all landed right at the top. And for the first time in her life, she didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified.
For the rest of the morning, Clara couldn't focus. Every sound in the lobby, the phones ringing, the elevator chime, the click of heels against marble, felt distant, muffled, as if the world had moved underwater. Mr. Rowe. Ethan Rowe. The name echoed in her mind like a bell she hadn't meant to ring. He wasn't just the man who brought her coffee. He was the man whose name was on every wall plaque, every employee memo, every email that came down from upper management. And she had written him a letter. A personal one. A vulnerable one. Oh, God, she whispered under her breath, her cheeks burning. What did I even say in that note? She tried to remember every word, how she'd thanked him for seeing her, how she'd admitted she'd been struggling. It wasn't just a polite thank you, it was a glimpse into her soul, and she'd handed it to the most powerful man in the building. She wanted to crawl under the front desk and vanish. But upstairs, in a corner office overlooking the skyline, Ethan Rowe was thinking about her too. He'd sat through 3 meetings since that morning, but he couldn't remember a single thing anyone said. Every time someone spoke about numbers or targets, his mind drifted back to the woman at the front desk, the way her voice trembled slightly when she spoke, the way she smiled like she was trying to convince herself the day would be okay. He built an empire out of strategy and precision, but in one small moment, she'd reminded him that humanity was what made it worth anything at all. And it wasn't just sentimentality. It was something he hadn't felt in years. A flicker of connection. He'd spent so long being Mr. Rowe that he'd forgotten what it was like to simply be Ethan. That afternoon, he called his assistant. Gelly, I want a full report on how our reception and front desk teams are treated. Hours, pay, workload, the whole thing. Kelly blinked. Sir, that's not something you usually request. I know, but maybe it's something I should have done a long time ago. When she left, Ethan leaned back in his chair and stared out at the skyline. The same skyline Clara probably looked at from street level, with rain on her umbrella and the weight of the world on her shoulders. He wondered how many people in his company felt like her, working tirelessly, unseen, unheard. Maybe kindness wasn't just an act. It was a responsibility. By the end of the week, small changes began to appear. The first came quietly, an anonymous email sent to all lower-level staff. "Thank you for being the face of our company every day. We see you, we value you, and you matter." Clara read it during her lunch break, smiling faintly as she stirred her soup. Something about the wording felt familiar. The next change came a few days later, new coffee machines installed in every break room, each with a small tag, "Because you deserve good coffee too." People laughed, took selfies, joked about the mysterious memo man, but to Clara, it didn't feel random. It felt personal. One night she stayed late again, filing paperwork for a last-minute meeting, while the office lights dimmed and the janitors began their rounds. The elevator dinged softly behind her. She turned, and there he was again. Ethan Rowe, minus the greatcoat this time, in a dark shirt with his sleeves rolled up, looking almost ordinary. "Still here?" he asked. She smiled nervously. "Still working," he said. "Dedicated. That's rare." She laughed softly. "I think it's more about survival than dedication." He raised an eyebrow. "Survival?" She hesitated, realizing how honest that sounded, but something about him made her drop her guard. "Yeah, rent doesn't wait, bills don't care how tired you are, so I show up, I smile, I keep going." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Clara, do you ever wonder if people know how much they rely on you?" She blinked. "I don't think anyone really notices. I mean, I'm just the front desk." "Just?" he repeated quietly. "You're the first voice people hear when they walk in, the first smile they see. That's not just. That's everything." Her voice caught him off guard. No one had ever said anything like that to her. "You sound like you've been thinking about this a lot," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." They talked for nearly an hour that night. About her mother, who lived 3 states away and was recovering from surgery. About how she sent her half her paycheck each month. About her late father, who used to tell her, "You don't have to be rich to make someone stay better. Just kind." And for the first time in years, Ethan found himself listening, really listening, without looking at his watch or checking his phone. When she laughed, something in him eased. When she spoke about her struggles, something in him ached. By the time she realized how late it was, the building was nearly dark except for the faint city glow outside. "Oh no, I've kept you," she said, startled. He shook his head. "No. You've reminded me." "Of what?" He hesitated, then said, "That sometimes the best conversations happen after everyone else goes home." The next morning, Clara found another note waiting on her desk, folded neatly beside her coffee cup. "You're not invisible. The world just hasn't caught up to how bright you are yet." She pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes glistening. She didn't need a signature to know who had written it. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was seen. Meanwhile, upstairs, Ethan found himself smiling at things that used to irritate him. The hum of conversation in the hallways, the sound of laughter by the elevators. He even started stopping by the break room, where stunned employees whispered after he left, "I think the CEO just said good morning?" The board noticed the shift. So did his staff, but only one person truly understood what had changed him. A receptionist on the 47th floor, who'd once written a letter that reminded him what it meant to lead with heart. By the end of that month, the company began rolling out a new initiative, Project Gratitude, a program designed to recognize and celebrate every unsung employee, from janitors to front desk clerks, with handwritten thank you letters and unexpected bonuses. Clara watched the announcement on the office monitors, her heart racing as she read the headline. And when Ethan Rowe stepped onto the stage to speak, she held her breath. He looked calm, confident, but when his eyes swept over the crowd and landed briefly on hers, his voice softened almost imperceptibly. "Kindness," he said, "isn't a corporate policy. It's a choice. One that starts small, sometimes with just a smile, or a letter." Her hand flew to her chest as he continued. "And if you ever think you don't make a difference, remember this.
One thank you can change the direction of an entire company. The room erupted in applause, but for Clara, it was hard to clap through the tears in her eyes, because in that moment, she realized it wasn't about her letter anymore. It was about what it started. That night, as the rain fell softly against the windows, Clara walked home with her umbrella tilted toward the sky, smiling through the drizzle. The world felt bigger now, but not in a way that scared her. In a way that reminded her that even the smallest act of gratitude could ripple all the way to the top.
The evening rain fell like silver threads, tracing the glass walls of Everline Tower. Down below, the city lights shimmered in the puddles, alive, restless, indifferent. Clara sat at her desk long after everyone else had gone home. The lobby was quiet, save for the distant hum of the elevator and the steady rhythm of the storm. She wasn't sure why she stayed late anymore. Maybe because silence was kinder than the noise waiting outside. Maybe because this building, and all its cold steel and glass, had begun to feel strangely safe. She glanced toward the elevator, half expecting, half hoping, and as if summoned by thought, the door slid open. Ethan Rose stepped out. No entourage, no suit jacket, just him, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled from the rain, and that same quiet presence that somehow filled a room without demanding to. "Still here?" he asked, softly, like he already knew the answer. Clara smiled faintly. "You always ask that." "That's because you're always here," he replied, walking closer. She shrugged lightly. "Guess I like the quiet." He smiled and said, "Funny, so do I. It's the only time this building feels honest." She tilted her head. "Honest." He looked around, at the marble floors, the spotless walls, the empty space. When people are gone, there's no performance, no pretenses, just truth. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Not the composed tone of a man in control, but the weariness of someone who'd been holding too much for too long. "Clara," he said after a pause, "do you ever think about what makes people stop being kind?" I'm not sure what you mean." He exhaled slowly, leaning against the counter. "When we're young, kindness feels natural, effortless. But somewhere along the line, the world teaches us to trade it for something else. Power, safety, control." She studied him quietly. There was something breaking in his voice, like he was remembering something he wished he could forget. "Is that what happened to you?" she asked gently. He smiled faintly, sad but not surprised. "You don't pull punches, do you?" She shrugged. "You asked an honest question." He nodded, almost amused. "Fair enough." Then his voice dropped lower. "Years ago, before Everline became what it is, I had a partner. Not a business partner, a person I loved." Clara froze. The way he said it, slow, deliberate, carried a weight no title could soften. "She was the reason I started this company. We wanted to build something that made finance more human, less about numbers, more about people. She believed empathy could coexist with success." "What happened to her?" Clara asked quietly. Ethan looked out at the rain. "She got sick, cancer. And when the company took off, I wasn't there. I kept saying I'd slow down after the next deal, but there was always another one. By the time I finally did, it was too late." The silence that followed felt sacred, the kind that holds grief rather than filling it. Clara's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry." He nodded, his gaze distant. "When she died, I told myself I'd never let emotion interfere with work again. So I buried it, all of it, the empathy, the patience, the humanity she loved in me, and I became exactly the kind of man she feared I'd turn into." He paused, voice soft but steady. "And then one day, a letter showed up on my desk, a thank you note from a stranger, a receptionist who didn't even know who I was, telling me that kindness still existed." Her eyes widened. "My letter." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something unguarded in his eyes. Not the CEO, not the polished success story, but a man who'd been waiting to be forgiven by the world. "Yes, your letter. You reminded me that what I had lost wasn't gone, just forgotten." Clara's voice trembled. "I didn't know who you were, Ethan. I swear, I never meant to." He raised a hand gently. "Clara, that's exactly why it mattered. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just being kind. But I don't understand. Why me? You could have talked to anyone, your board, your friends." He smiled faintly. "Because none of them would have told me the truth the way you do." Her lips parted, words caught in her throat. "What truth?" He said simply, "I stopped seeing people. And the moment I did, I stopped being the man I wanted to be." The outside rain softened to a mist. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara whispered, "You're not that man anymore." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his chest shifted. "I'm trying not to be," he said. Then quieter, "You helped with that." She smiled softly. "Then I guess my thank you found its way home." They stood there in silence. The hum of the city below blended with the soft patter of rain on glass. Ethan turned toward his office. "I want to show you something," he said. He led her upstairs, not through the elevator this time, but through the back stairwell that wound quietly up through the tower.
When they reached the top, the doors opened into his office, but it didn't feel like an office anymore. It felt like a memory. Framed photos lined the shelves. A woman with bright eyes and a laugh caught in mid-smile, standing beside a younger Ethan back when ambition hadn't dulled his joy. This was her, he said softly, nodding toward the photo. Anna. Clara stepped closer, her gaze gentle. She looks kind. She was. The kindest person I've ever known. He reached for a drawer and pulled something out. A small box filled with folded letters. She used to write me one every time I left for business trips. Little notes, encouragements, reminders to be human. He smiled faintly. I stopped opening them after she died. Clara looked at him, her voice a whisper. Why? Because every word in them reminded me of what I'd failed to do. He opened the top letter, his hands trembling slightly. Do you know what this one said? She shook her head. He read aloud. Don't forget to look up once in a while. There's a world out there waiting to be loved. Not bought, not led, not managed. Just loved. He folded it carefully and looked up, eyes glistening. When I read your thank you note, it felt like she was speaking to me again. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. Maybe she was, she said softly. He smiled through his tears. Maybe. The clock ticked quietly between them. Rain streaked the windows, turning the city into a blur of gold and silver light. Ethan took a deep breath. Clara, I owe you more than I can ever say. You reminded me why I started all of this, why I believed in people in the first place. She shook her head. You don't owe me anything. I just wrote a letter. He met her gaze. You didn't just write a letter. You wrote hope. And I read it on the exact day I needed to remember what it felt like. There was something raw in the air now. A quiet intimacy that came not from attraction but from truth. Two souls standing on opposite sides of power, and finding somehow that kindness had made them equals. Finally, Clara smiled, a real, trembling smile. Then maybe we both needed a reminder. Ethan nodded, returning it. Maybe we did. Outside, the rain began to fade, and for the first time in years, Ethan Rowe didn't see his company as a tower of glass and numbers. He saw it as a reflection of all the people who kept it alive. One thank you, one smile, one unseen act of goodness at a time.
A week after that night in Ethan's office, the air around Everline Financial felt different. Lighter. Warmer. Employees noticed the small things first. The open doors, the smiles in hallways that used to echo with silence. The new company bulletin board near the lobby titled Letters of Gratitude. At first, people thought it was just another HR campaign, a nice idea that would fade in a month. But then the letters began to appear. Handwritten ones, typed ones, scribbled on sticky notes. Thank yous from coworkers, appreciation from managers, even messages from the janitorial team taped up in uneven rows. Thank you to whoever restocked the coffee pods every morning. To the night shift team, we notice you, and we're grateful. To Clara at the front desk, you always remember our names. Each new note rippled through the office like a heartbeat, a pulse of something human in a place once built on routine and numbers. And at the center of it all stood Clara, watching as strangers found the courage to be kind out loud. She didn't know that Ethan had started it, that he'd made Project Gratitude a permanent policy with her anonymous letter as its inspiration. All she knew was that people were smiling again. And somehow, that was enough. On Friday evening, just as the office was emptying out, Ethan called Clara up to his floor. She arrived nervous, hands fidgeting with her notebook, half expecting this was about a promotion or a transfer. She wasn't ready for either. But when she stepped into his office, she found Ethan standing by the window. No suit, no laptop, just a small box on his desk. He turned when he heard her. "Clara," he said softly, "do you have a moment?" "Of course," she said. "Is everything okay?" He smiled. Not the rehearsed one she'd seen in photos, but the kind that made his eyes soften. "Better than okay." He gestured toward the box. "I wanted to give you something." She stepped closer. Inside the box was a stack of envelopes, hundreds of them, sealed, each one with a different name written across the front. "What are these?" she asked. "They're letters. Handwritten thank you notes from every department in the company. We've been collecting them all month." Her fingers brushed the edges of one. "You read every single one?" He nodded. "Every single one." "And do you know what I realized?" She shook her head, her throat tightening. "That kindness doesn't need a department or a memo. It just needs permission. And you gave this place permission to feel again." Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't do that, Ethan. You did." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I did, but I wouldn't have remembered how if you hadn't reminded me." He reached into the box and pulled out one final envelope, different from the rest. Her name was written across it. Clara Benson. She hesitated, then took it carefully. "Can I open it?" "Please." She unfolded the letter, her fingers trembling slightly. "Dear Clara, you once thanked a stranger for a simple act of kindness, but you didn't know that stranger had forgotten how to feel. Your words did more than warm a cold morning. They changed a cold heart. You reminded me that leadership isn't about control, it's about care. You reminded me that small acts still matter. You helped me find my humanity again. And for that, this company and I will always be grateful. With respect and thanks, Ethan." Her hand covered her mouth as she read, tears blurring the ink. For a long time she couldn't speak. She simply looked up at him, this man she once thought was just another stranger, and saw not a CEO, not a billionaire, but a human being learning to live differently. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled softly. "You already said that once." She laughed through the tears. "Guess it's worth saying again." That night, as the office lights dimmed and the rain began to fall again, Clara lingered in the lobby looking up at the tall letters that spelled Everline. She thought about the irony, how a company built on lines and ledgers could become the birthplace of something immeasurable. Before leaving, she took a blank sheet of paper from her notebook and began to write, one last time. "To the stranger who reminded me that kindness always finds its way home, thank you. Not for changing my life, but for showing me that it was worth living with an open heart." She folded the letter, placed it on the front desk where it had all begun, and walked out into the rain. Ethan found the note the next morning. He read it once, then smiled. A quiet, knowing smile that reached his eyes. He slipped the letter into his coat and walked through the building as the morning sun spilled across the marble floors. Employees greeted him as he passed, some with timid smiles, others with quiet admiration. He nodded at each of them, his mind echoing the same truth. It's never too late to remember who you were meant to be. That afternoon, as he left the building, he paused at the front doors and looked up at the clouds breaking apart, revealing soft streaks of sunlight over the city. For the first time in years, Ethan Rowe didn't feel like a man running a company. He felt like a man living a life again. And somewhere across town, Clara Benson sat at a cafe window writing her next letter. To no one in particular, and to everyone at once. Because that's what kindness does. It doesn't end. It just finds another beginning.